People say you can measure a biotech company's ethics by the way its lab smells: ethanol, scorched plastic, and a hint of arrogance scrubbed until it's sterile. Helix Vita Biotech in Seattle, Washington, a company that calls itself a pioneer in cell therapy and honestly, a pioneer in packaging ambition. I've worked here for 16 years. I've seen everything blow up except the company itself. My title sounds dry: Head of Biosafety Control. It means if a cell sample fails, I am the last signature on it. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong in my hands. I used to believe I was part of something good, until the day Sloane Carver walked in. She entered the lab like an influencer who'd lost her GPS: white blazer, a smile practiced in the mirror, and a bouquet of fresh flowers placed next to the test tubes. "I want to bring positive energy into this space," she said, voice light as latte foam. I just replied, "Positive energy doesn't sanitize anything, Sloane." She laughed, the kind you hear from someone who doesn't understand but is afraid to lose points. Sloane was our new director of strategy and the wife of our CEO, Victor Carver. Victor used to believe in science. Now he believes in the woman who believes in aesthetics. Helix Vita used to be a company built by people. Now it's a company built by ideas stuffed into PowerPoint decks. In the marketing wing, there's a slogan on the wall, big enough to guide airport traffic: "We don't sell products, we sell possibilities." I look at it every morning and think, one day, we'll sell our conscience too, wrapped in a spring campaign. 3 months after Sloane arrived, she held a company-wide meeting, complete with a ring light and a pink microphone. She opened with, "Good morning, besties. Let's disrupt some paradigms today." Half the room forced a smile. The other half stared anywhere except at the glare bouncing off her white shoes. While she talked about restructuring creative energy, I thought about the last time I patched the data system to keep us from losing our FDA license. Midnight. Just me and a screen. No ring light. No one is calling me bestie. Rumors spread faster than a virus. Sloane wanted to prove herself to the board, to show she earned her position, not just through Victor's last name. A junior assistant whispered in the break room, "She needs a big debut, a bold decision, someone she can prove she's willing to cut." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. The model innovation meeting next week confirmed everything. Sloane stood in the center, a slide glowing behind her. Rebuild, refresh, replace. We need to trim outdated processes, eliminate old departments, and replace them with young, dynamic energy. Scattered claps. I just nodded. I knew exactly who the old department was supposed to be. When the meeting ended, she turned to me. "Evelyn, what do you think about renewal?" I answered. "I think renewal shouldn't mean erasing the things that kept us alive." The room went silent. She kept smiling, but her eyes looked like they were assessing what needed to be removed. The next morning, the internal system sent me a notice. "Please reconfirm your employee data for record updates." 16 years here, and they've never asked for that. I sat still for a moment, listening to the hum of the AC above me. I knew. Real changes never arrive with warning labels. That afternoon, walking out of the lab, I looked up at the 15th floor, Sloane's office. Light spilled down the hallway like a surgical incision. She stood there, laughing at someone on her laptop, probably the board. People said she didn't just want to run Helix Vita. She wanted to make them forget she was ever the CEO's wife. I made tea, opened my laptop, and saw the email. Subject: Board Strategy Session tomorrow at 9 in the morning. From Sloane Carver. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because in 16 years, no one had ever invited me to a strategy session. I didn't know exactly when Sloane decided I was the obstacle to innovation, but I knew one thing for certain. Impressing the board meant more to her than my 16 years of experience. I looked out the window. Seattle rain, gray, steady, beating like the heart of someone who's been disappointed too many times. I sipped my cold tea and whispered to myself, maybe it's time Helix Vita relearned safety. Outside the lab, too. If you're still listening, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Florida, Texas, Boston. I just want to know where you live, and do ethics need to pass inspection before going to market? The next morning, the elevator carried me to the board floor. The conference room was high up, glassy, and so cold you could see every wrinkle on a lie. In the center sat a long walnut table, stretched out like a runway for plans that were equal parts risky and expensive. At one end of the table were the people who'd learned how to nod. At the other end were the people who'd learned how to perform. Sloan stood in the middle and pulled up the first slide. The title, Helix Vita Next Gen, appeared in deep blue, arrows moving like a school of glowing fish. Beneath the title were three bold words: compress, consolidate, launch. I exhaled. At least she changed the slogan this time. The next slide showed a projected growth chart, the curve smooth like a video game graphic. At the bottom was a small note: projected FDA clearance in Q3. One glance, and I knew that data hadn't been verified. Sloan spoke in the voice of someone who had practiced in front of a mirror. Helix Vita is standing at a crossroads of opportunity. If we dare to jump, we will soar. My plan has 3 phases: cut slow processes, merge scattered teams, and hit the market before IPO. Speed is our ethical advantage. I wrote silently. Ethics rarely run at high speed. Whitaker, the only board member who ever read the real reports, frowned. The safety results still aren't signed. We could face an FDA audit. She set her pen down, the click small but sharp. Sloan smiled, confident, as if she'd just been complimented. I'll handle it. I'll eliminate the remaining obstacles. Her eyes slid past my shoulder, cold, brief, precise like a scalpel. The third slide appeared, a new org chart. Some name boxes were gone. The safety review line had been replaced with a fast review. I stayed quiet. Her approach was exactly like deleting code she didn't understand. I spoke slowly. If you cut controls, the errors will stack. The FDA only needs one random inspection to freeze the entire program. Sloan smiled, the kind of smile reserved for people she didn't consider important. Thank you, Evelyn. But in this market, being slow is also a risk. Then she turned to the board. I propose giving the CEO's office final approval authority to remove the bottleneck. I take full responsibility. Lang, the fund's representative, nodded. That's the spirit we need. Victor, the CEO, and her husband stayed silent, eyes fixed on the slide as if they could see the ladder he and his wife were climbing. The board chair asked, "And if there's legal exposure?" Sloan answered softly, "We're not doing anything wrong, just doing it fast." The word fast hit the room like a grain of sand landing on glass. Once the meeting wrapped, people drifted out with hollow handshakes. Victor walked behind the table, gently touching his wife's back. Go ahead. They want decisive action. A decision was signed without any paperwork. I waited until the room emptied, then stepped forward. Sloan, I said calmly, if you accelerate the trials, one small error could cost Helix Vita its license. She adjusted her hair in the black screen, her reflection layered over mine. Or, she said, I get promoted, who can say? Then she turned, her smile polished to perfection. I'm not a roadblock. I'm the reason this company is still alive. Exactly, she said. And that's why it needs to change. The hallway lights reflected blue and white. Victor was waiting, handing her a thin folder. The board wants you to move now. I told them strength is a plus. I walked past them. Sloan called after me, voice warm like freshly pressed velvet. Evelyn, to keep things simple, transfer your final approval rights to the CEO's office. Just temporary, 30 days. The CEO's account isn't where you put test tubes, I said. We'll be safe, she smiled, because we'll be fast. That afternoon, an internal email arrived. Final signature authority reassigned to the office of the CEO. Temporary SOP, 30 days. One line to legitimize a reckless decision. Greg from HR passed by, whispering, Don't ask me. I sign whatever they hand me. I nodded. That's how a system starts breaking, one signature at a time. That night, a junior engineer messaged me. Evelyn, is it true they're cutting safety checks? I replied. Worrying is a healthy reflex when reckless people call themselves brave. By morning, my inbox erupted. PR wanted to redefine the term validation. Legal asked to simplify compliance language. Finance wanted to know how much money we could save without controls, all within one day. A plan was in motion, and no one dared stop it. At the far end of the hall, the elevator opened. Sloane stood inside, smiling. Evelyn, you think I'm reckless, don't you? I think you're playing with something you can't regenerate. Trust. If we stay old, we'll die in the lab. I wasn't born to die in a lab. Neither was I said. But I wasn't born to kill people with errors either. The elevator doors closed, catching my reflection in the silver light. Calm. Not angry, just clear. At noon, Victor sent a company-wide email. Helix Vita is entering an acceleration phase. The CEO's office will remove bottlenecks. The new slogan sat at the bottom. Speed is how we care. I let out a quiet laugh. If speed is how they care, patients should learn how to run. Late that evening, I stayed to review the system logs. Everything was still clean, until someone decided to clean it manually. I locked the backup into my private vault, a habit I consider a form of prayer. Outside, Seattle rain fell in thin, steady lines, like silver threads stitching up a wound without anesthesia. From the moment she said eliminate obstacles, justice had been polished into a marketing prop. And the best polishers are the ones who know how to hold a mirror at the perfect angle. She knew that. And I knew something else. The cleaner the mirror, the easier it is to see the cracks. Tomorrow they'll call it leadership, and I'll call it what it really is, a chain reaction. The email arrived at 7:42 in the morning. Subject, quick sync, transition 4:30 in the afternoon. No greeting, no context. Just one line, cold as a blade. I looked at it and knew instantly, this wasn't a meeting. It was an execution time. The entire office was quieter than usual. When I walked past HR, a few people paused their typing for half a second. An instinctive flinch at the scent of endings. Greg avoided my eyes, holding his coffee like a shield. I didn't ask. Some things you don't force the messenger to say. I kept working, checked the final safety review for the trial batch, downloaded the system logs, and locked internal access. The final backup was encrypted, separate, and legal. A pre-stress check, like one engineer once told me, if you know the dam is about to break, get your boat ready first. By 4, I packed my desk, shut down my machine, and brewed one last cup of mint tea. The metallic taste at the tip of my tongue, the taste of an ending you saw coming. The HR room was white and cold, the disinfectant smell thick, as if designed to scrub emotion out of the air. Sloane sat waiting, legs crossed, in sand-colored blazer. On the table were 2 envelopes, one with the Helix Vita logo, one plain. Evelyn, she said, voice light, well-rehearsed. The company is entering a phase of renewal and agility. The board supports me 100%. I sat down, hands on my lap. They will love you until they need someone to fix your mistakes. A tiny wrinkle appeared at the corner of her mouth, then vanished. I believe everyone has their own value. My value, I said, sits in the things you never bothered to see. The door opened. Greg walked in, pale like someone who had just signed an eviction order. He placed a folder in front of me. Standard severance package, he murmured. 3 months of pay, extended insurance if you enroll before Friday. I folded it, voice steady. Thank you. Then I looked at Sloane. I will leave, but the system will leave with me. She froze for a moment. Just one blink, but enough to reveal the first crack in her polished confidence. I set my badge on the table. Quiet. The faint plastic against wood sounded like the last heartbeat of a partnership. Greg stood up out of habit. I didn't look back. Good luck with your speed, Sloane. I walked toward the door. Evelyn, she called after me, trying to steady her tone. No one is irreplaceable. I turned slightly. I know. But no one replaces the consequences. The elevator descended, slow and smooth. Each floor that slipped past felt like a layer of memory peeling away. The night I fixed a failure at 3 in the morning, the time I protected the system from malware, the line of code I corrected after she called it old. The lobby opened, reflecting my shape in the glass. Calm. The atrium was silent. No goodbyes. When I stepped outside, Seattle rain poured, thin, cold, needing no thunder to make itself heard. There's a saying: in corporate ethics, there are no corpses, only data without a keeper. Today, the data just lost its keeper. I walked to the corner cafe, where the barista still remembered I liked my espresso without sugar. I sat by the window and opened my personal laptop. The screen lit up, clean lines of code flowing, my work, my scripts, written back in 2016 when people still thought AI was just a trend. I didn't break anything, didn't delete, didn't sabotage. I only closed access. A door doesn't need a lock, it just needs to stop opening. Outside, the rain tapped the glass, like threads sewing up a wound in a hurry. In my mind, Helix Vita's system kept running, confident, loud, unaware that its final bolt had just been removed. My phone buzzed. A new message. Sloan. The board loved it. They said I finally made a tough call. I stared at the screen until the notification faded under the cafe lights. She finally had what she wanted. Praise. I put the phone away, took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was honest, more honest than any thank you I ever heard in that building. Night fell, and an automated email arrived. Access revoked. All internal credentials have been removed. I laughed. They were fast, exactly like their new slogan. Outside, the city shimmered like a pool of liquid silver. I saw my reflection, neither winning nor losing, just free. On the 15th floor of Helix Vita, a woman believed she had just done the right thing. But in science, the most dangerous thing isn't being wrong. It's believing you're right. 2 days later, the city woke to rain and headlines. No sirens, no explosions, just numbers falling in free fall. On my phone screen, a small alert flashed. Biosafety monitor response delay detected. Then a second one, a third. By the 200th, the system had clearly lost its mind. Helix Vita's biosafety monitoring platform, the crown jewel of every presentation Sloan ever made, began speaking nonsense. More precisely, it started sending hundreds of emails to itself, all with the same subject line: system error, but make it fashionable. I could almost hear Sloan screaming from the 15th floor, even though I was sitting quietly in a cafe with a hot cup of Earl Grey. The window fogged over. I drew a small letter O with my fingertip and looked outside. The Helix Vita building stood there like a block of ice cracking from the inside out. Online, the phrase Helix crisis climbed to the top. Screenshots of the email system error, but in a fashion spread across professional networks. Someone commented, maybe give the AI a job in public relations. Another replied, when the AI starts having a personality, humans should start worrying. Investors pulled out. The stock plunged, shards of glass in a free fall. A financial channel reported, when the head of safety is fired for speed, speed certainly happens, just in the wrong direction. I laughed softly, nearly choking on my tea. Every bitter sip tasted like justice today. On television, CEO Victor appeared, tie crooked, face damp with sweat. We are managing the situation, he said. There is no threat to public health. I looked at him through the screen and thought, the biggest threat is believing you're in control. That evening, the technical report leaked. Cause: validation file deleted during the fast review process. Red annotation: approved by the office of the CEO. A former colleague sent me a picture, adding only one line. She signed it herself. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In the middle of the crisis, Sloan still posted on the internal network. Challenge creates opportunity. Someone responded underneath. An opportunity to get sued. By mid-morning, the Helix Vita office turned into a panicked hive. Public relations got swamped. Legal lit up in warning lights. Junior engineers cried in front of error screens. I stayed in the same cafe seat, listening to the rain blend with the grinder's hum, slow, steady, patient. Sometimes justice doesn't need a drum. It just needs silence long enough for the other side to make the noise themselves. My phone buzzed. Marcy, from legal. Evelyn. They're asking who wrote the auto start script. You know, right? I typed, deleted, then finally sent 3 words. I'm retired now. By noon, their entire internal network collapsed. The homepage turned white, displaying a single line: temporary maintenance, please wait. In the industry, they call it a digital blackout. I call it silence, the expensive kind that follows too many ignored warnings. By afternoon, the news updated. Investors filed lawsuits. A commentator said, "When ambition outruns expertise, technology doesn't collapse, its operator does." I lifted my cup and took a sip. The bitterness was soft, almost pleasant. Maybe because I was no longer in a hurry. Outside, Helix Vita employees spilled out of the building like ants leaving a broken nest. Some still believed it would be fine. Others had already sent out resumes. I watched through the fogged glass. Not angry, not triumphant, just calm. Because I knew saving someone who can't swim only drags you both under. A new message arrived from an unknown number. "Evelyn, if you still have the original logs, please help. They say the company will shut down if they can't restore the system by Monday." I read it slowly, then locked my screen. No, I didn't need revenge. I simply stopped saving them. Karma doesn't need my hands. Just enough time. Outside, an ambulance wailed. Down the boulevard. Not for Helix Vita, but for some small accident somewhere. Still, the sound stretched long and thin, scraping against my ribs like a warning delivered late. On my screen, the final headline appeared: CEO Eldridge temporarily steps down pending investigation. I closed my laptop, left cash on the table, and stood up. The rain had stopped, leaving only mist. The sunset gleamed against the Helix Vita windows, light flickering like a warning lamp inside a goldfish tank. I inhaled deeply. No gloating, no bitterness, only stillness. Because sometimes the quiet is the loudest alarm of all. On Wednesday morning, Helix Vita looked like a living body dying under fluorescent lights. The revolving doors opened more than they closed, letting out employees who walked at the pace of people who had just learned they no longer had a reason to return. On the 15th floor, where Sloan once hosted innovation brunches with gluten-free waffles, there was nothing left but the smell of stress and foundation mixed with the burnt scent of overloaded equipment. That morning, the public relations team met in crisis mode. They decided to reclaim the narrative with a short video titled "Helix Vita Cares." In the video, a warm and steady female voice said, "At Helix Vita, we care about your future." But in the final exported version, the voice modulation system glitched. One vowel warped, changing the entire sentence into, "At Helix Vita, we care about your future." The video premiered at dawn on Sloan's orders to symbolize a new beginning. 2 hours later, it hit 1 million views. The first comment: "Caring by scaring customers, an interesting strategy," followed by, "If fear is how they care, they are excellent at it." The phrase Helix crisis climbed the charts again. Someone wrote, "The AI writes scripts for the AI. Humans only deal with the fallout." The video was pulled down in desperation, but the internet never forgets. Sloan slammed her phone on the table, mascara still wet, leaving 2 gray streaks down her cheeks. "Why has no one taken that video down yet?" she snapped. A public relations staffer whispered, "You told us to post it at dawn for symbolism and hope, so we—" "Hope," she shouted. "This is a digital funeral." She kept calling, from public relations to media, until she stopped at one name: Evelyn. She inhaled sharply, voice cracking. "I know we do things differently, but you have to help me. The system crashed, customers are suing, and the stock is falling. I cannot control it anymore." I was in the same old cafe, my cup of Earl Grey still steaming. "Sloan," I said, "I helped you for 16 years. You just never noticed." Silence on the other end. I heard her breath break a little. "Evelyn, I was wrong. I just wanted them to see that I was worthy. I did not mean to ruin things. I just did not want to be dismissed." I answered slowly. "You were not dismissed, Sloan. You just confused creativity with recklessness. Those two are not relatives." At that moment, another voice said off camera, "The live stream is starting, Sloan." She lifted her head. I heard her inhale, then switch into broadcast mode. That afternoon, she went live. "Hello, everyone," her voice trembling but trying to brighten. "I know the past few days have been difficult, but I want you to see that I am strong." White lights hit her pale makeup. The two mascara streaks were still there, evidence captured in high definition. She smiled, then cried, then smiled again. The live stream exploded in exponential waves. Comments pelted the screen like hail. Is she crying about the company or because her filter failed? Smart people know when to go live. Wise people know when to pull the plug. The public relations team removed the full video after 2 hours, but a 15-second clip, Sloan sobbing while saying, "We care," spread everywhere. A satire channel titled it, "Chief Executive Officer in 4K Meltdown." Memes followed. Helix Vita testing pharmaceuticals, failing at emotions I watched without laughing. Because beneath the lipstick and taglines, she was still human, scared, hollow, lost. The tragedy was choosing the wrong battlefield to be strong in, the camera instead of her decisions. By late afternoon, Helix Vita's legal department issued a notice, an investigation notice of potential data misuse. A former colleague sent me the PDF with a note. She is blaming someone for tampering with the system. I read until I reached the line. Possible breach related to former employee Evelyn Hart. A soft laugh left me. Of course. I reprinted my non-disclosure agreement, signed it again, and saved the digital copy. In law, silence is not avoidance, it is preparation. That evening, the news updated. Helix Vita's license was temporarily suspended. On television, Sloan walked out of the building, still managing a strained smile for the press, hair frayed under the rain. The anchor spoke slowly. Sloan Eldridge, once praised as a face of innovation, is now under internal investigation. I turned off the television. Outside the window, the rain fell softly and evenly, as if nature was washing away what people refused to name. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They want you as a witness. I looked at the screen, quietly. She had destroyed everything herself. I had only stood at a distance, the way someone who used to put out fires stands and watches the ashes drift. I put on my coat and stepped out of the cafe. The Seattle night was cold but clear. Across the street, the billboard still carried the old slogan, "Speed is how we care." The letters were blurred by rain, leaving only the final words, "We care." I smiled softly. Now they have all the time in the world to think about it. 3 weeks later, Helix Vita was no longer a company. It was a crime scene. The hallways were long and too bright, fluorescent light reflecting off pale stone floors where only the footsteps of auditors still echoed. The double helix emblem had been removed from the main lobby. Someone claimed it was for cleaning, but everyone knew the thing needing cleaning was never the logo. That morning, the FDA and the Securities Commission launched simultaneous investigations. A line of people in black suits entered without knocking, carrying folders thick as pre-printed verdicts. Outside the conference room, a small sign was taped up. Internal review, restricted access. Inside, Victor Eldridge, the CEO and Sloan's husband, sat at the center of the table. His tie undone halfway, eyes bruised, voice cracked. Who approved these numbers? No one answered. People kept their heads down, tapping on keyboards like actors pretending to work. Finally, Dr. Heller, head of the science division, stood. His voice was even, dry, stripped of emotion. The approval email was sent from your account, Victor. Victor froze. Impossible. I never sign unverified reports. Heller flipped the folder open. Your account logged in at 2341 from the internal IP of the Innovation Office. The user was identified as Sloan Eldridge. The air turned solid. Victor whispered, barely audible. She used my account. Heller looked at him. Not judgment, only the tiredness of someone who had seen this coming. She may have believed that if your signature was there, the board would trust it. And they did. An investigator from the Securities Commission spoke, voice flat as a weather report. Falsifying listed information is a federal offense, sir. No one responded. Only the slow tick of the wall clock filled the room, a quiet countdown. Later that afternoon, in a small cafe in South Seattle, Evelyn answered a call from an unfamiliar number. Ms. Hart, This is Agent Collins from the Securities Commission. We request your cooperation in the Helix Vita investigation. I no longer work there, we know, but you are the only person who retained the original system logs. I understand. We need you to be present tomorrow morning at 10. All right. She set her phone down. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the glass. Steam rose from her cup in soft spirals, like an old promise whispered back. Truth never needs to run, only wait. The federal inquiry room was bright white, quiet enough to hear pages turning. Evelyn sat across from Dr. Heller, now serving as technical advisor to the auditors. He asked, "You brought the logs?" "Yes, encrypted and stored offline. I printed a copy on paper." He nodded. "You should know that what you submit today may become courtroom evidence." "I know. I am only returning what the system saw. Software has no talent for lying." Heller bowed his head slightly, his voice smaller. "You kept the evidence all this time. Now is when it matters." The words were soft as breath, yet heavier than any verdict. That night, the news opened with the headline, "Helix Vita is under federal investigation." Footage of Sloan appeared. She hurried out of the building, eyes swollen, one hand covering her face with a stack of documents. Reporters shouted, "Did you forge the signatures? Do you admit misconduct?" She gave no answers. The car door slammed shut, swallowed by flashing lights. One news site wrote, "The woman who sold speed as virtue may now face justice at its slowest pace." The line spread across the internet like a proverb no one dared revise. The next morning, Evelyn entered the federal hearing room. She placed her folder on the table, speaking clearly, not shaky, not raised. "You confirm this is the original system log?" a lawyer asked. "I confirm." Line 2348 states, "Manual override users Eldridge." "Can you guarantee no one else accessed the system at that time?" "I can." "Logs are incapable of pretending." The room fell into silence. A young investigator nodded slowly, as if hearing a new definition of justice. The moment data begins telling the story for the people who could not. Meanwhile, in his old office, Victor signed his resignation letter. The final line read, "I accept ethical responsibility for the failures and oversight." He read it carefully, then let the pen fall, as though cutting the last tie to a beautiful illusion. The door opened. Sloan stepped in, pale makeup, dry lips. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to save the company." Victor looked up, exhausted but not angry. "By forging my signature, I thought they would believe it more with your name. You were right. They did. But now they also believe I lied." She broke down, mascara dripping into two thin black trails. Victor spoke slowly. "You once said that speed was ethics. Now you see, ethics without time to think is just an accident enlarged." She didn't answer. He walked past her. The room held only the hum of the air conditioner and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with fear. Late that night, Evelyn opened her laptop. The front page of the Seattle Tribune read, "Helix Vita, under federal investigation. Former engineer provides key evidence." Below was an old photo of her at a conference, captioned, "Evelyn Hart, believed to have provided the original system logs." She read it, then smiled. Not triumphant, not bitter, just the smile of someone who has watched the wheels of justice turn slowly but firmly. Outside her window, it rained in Seattle again. This time, the rain did not sound like morning. It sounded like cleansing. The federal courtroom in downtown Seattle blazed with lights, yet no one felt warm. White walls, high ceiling, brightness cutting across the faces of people who once commanded hundreds of others. Now only defendants waiting to be questioned. No more power, only guilt. The gallery was packed with reporters, cameras humming like mechanical insects. In the front row, Evelyn Hart sat straight, her hands resting on a thin folder. No shaking, no avoiding, just calm, as if attending the funeral of a lie. "Mrs. Evelyn Hart, please take the stand." She rose and stepped forward. The overhead lights caught the silver strands in her hair and the quiet resolve in her eyes. Below, Sloan Eldridge sat beside her defense attorney, lips pale, eyes sunken. Next to her, Victor, the former CEO, bowed his head, fingers locked together. Mrs. Hart, the prosecutor began. You oversaw system safety at Helix Vita. Correct, correct. Were you aware that the validation data had been altered? Yes. Evelyn's voice was steady, cold, and clean, like a system log being read out loud. I discovered irregularities about a month before I was fired. I warned them that accelerating trials without validation would create serious legal risk. And how did leadership respond? They laughed. Then renamed the process from safety review to fast review. Pens scratched across notepads. Evelyn looked straight ahead, her voice low but sharp. I did not break the company. I simply stopped fixing the mistakes they kept hiding. The judge lifted his gaze, eyes bright behind heavy glasses. Do you have evidence? Yes. She opened her laptop, projecting the log onto the courtroom screen. White text glowed across the display. Manual override user S. Eldridge access granted. CEO at Helix. Vita effed a clearance. Fake. .xlsx uploaded. No one spoke. Even the microphones seemed to hold their breath. You confirm that only you and 2 members of the CEO's office had access confirmed. And the duplicate logs have already been filed with the Securities Commission. Sloane's attorney shot up. Objection. There is no proof Ms. Eldridge entered the data herself. The judge turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Hart. She answered, every action carries a biometric signature. The log shows a sequence matching her fingerprint and device ID. Logs cannot pretend. People can, and they are much better at it. The final sentence sliced through the room. The attorney sat down. The prosecutor advanced to supplemental evidence, the doctored emails, and the public relations video. The speakers played the artificial voice. At Helix Vita, speed is how we care. The judge frowned. A reporter whispered, in this case, even ethics were fast-forwarded. Victor looked up at his wife. No anger, only exhaustion. In that moment, the man who once ran a billion-dollar empire looked like a student caught cheating on an exam. During cross-examination, the defense tried to claw back ground. Mrs. Hart, do you have any personal conflict with my client? No. My only conflict is with dishonesty. Why keep the logs instead of deleting them? Habit. I used to tell my students, when you write code, assume one day it may testify for you. A few soft laughs broke out, thin as breath. Order, the judge said, tapping the gavel lightly. The prosecutor stepped forward again. Mrs. Hart, if you could go back, what would you do differently? Evelyn paused. I would leave sooner. Some companies do not need heroes. They need mirrors. Silence swallowed the room. A pen rolled off a desk and kept rolling. 2 hours later, the judge returned with the findings. His voice was firm, even, and mechanical. Based on the evidence, this court refers the matter to criminal authorities. Sloane Eldridge is charged with financial fraud, falsifying medical data, and forging signatures. Victor Eldridge is subject to investigation for complicity through negligence and abuse of authority. 3 strikes of the gavel. Final. Sloane lowered her head, her shoulders trembling once. Only once. Victor stared at the floor, his hand no longer reaching for hers. The courtroom stayed bright, but no one truly saw anything anymore. That afternoon, the front page of the Seattle Tribune ran a bold headline, Helix Vita Couple, under federal probe. Below it, the subheading, The Quiet Whistleblower, How a Silent Engineer Brought Down a Billion-Dollar Lie. Evelyn read it, the blue glow reflected in her eyes. No joy, no bitterness, just the faint smile of someone who had watched the wheel of justice complete a full, slow turn. Reporters called for interviews. She responded simply, I have nothing to add. The truth already spoke. A week later, a letter of thanks arrived from the commission. The final line italicized, Your testimony restored faith in the system. She folded the letter and placed it beside the old log, the one she had never deleted. Seattle's night was still. The Helix Vita building is now dark, with a for lease sign hanging crooked by the entrance. Evelyn paused across the street, looking up at the 15th floor, the once blinding conference room, now honest darkness. She whispered to herself, in the end, silence learned how to speak. Then lifted her gaze, eyes catching the glow of the street lamps. And sometimes it speaks louder than the law. She walked away, not fast, not slow, like someone who knows justice never needs to rush. It only needs to arrive. 3 months after the trial, Seattle was raining again. Not the heavy storm of the crisis days, but a thin, quiet rain, as if the city were rinsing off old dust. In the northern part of the city, a small glass building carried a new sign: Northwest Institute for Research Integrity. Inside, among bright green ferns and white walls, Evelyn Hart sat across from a group of interns. No blazer, no badge, just a gray sweater and a steaming cup of Earl Grey. She had been invited to serve as a scientific ethics advisor, a job with no stock options, no pressure, only space for people to finally speak honestly. A young student with her hair tied high asked, "Ms. Evelyn, if you could go back, would you regret anything?" Evelyn set the cup down, porcelain tapping gently against the glass table. "No." She paused, looking out at the morning light sliding through the window. "But I wish I had spoken earlier, back when people were still listening." Silence filled the room. Not the fearful kind, more the kind that comes when something finally makes sense. Another student asked, hesitant, "Do you hate Miss Sloane?" Evelyn smiled softly. "No, I only feel sorry for her. Sorry, she believed power was a wall when it was only a curtain. Curtains look pretty, but the wind blows and they fall." The class laughed quietly, half respectful, half unsure. She added, "She was not entirely bad. She just trusted speed more than truth. And speed never waits for anyone. It only runs people over." On the whiteboard behind her, someone had written with a marker, "Fast is not forward." Evelyn nodded at it. Right. Moving fast does not mean moving right. During the lunch break, she stepped into the small courtyard behind the building. Ferns were spreading across the stone walkway. Sunlight drifted down, carrying the scent of tea with it. A sparrow landed on the railing, glanced at her, then flew off. Evelyn smiled. After years, she finally understood. Some things are not meant to be carried. Resentment, justification. They are heavy, and heavy things never fly. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Heller. The commission finalized the report. Helix Vita is officially dissolved. The SEC wants you on the new Advisory Council for Ethics in AI Research. She read it and typed back, "I do not want a council. I want a classroom." Heller replied with a laughing emoji. Still the same. Peaceful, but dangerous. That afternoon, she toured a simulated lab with the interns. A male student pointed at the protocol board. "What if someone discovers wrongdoing but is afraid of retaliation?" Evelyn stopped, looking at him through her safety goggles. "Then they still speak. Silence does not avoid trouble. It only tells trouble where it is safe to grow." She lifted her goggles, voice softer. "Sometimes people call it whistleblowing. I call it delayed honesty." In the corner of the room hung a photo from last year's conference, showing her beside a sign that read, "Scientific truth is a human duty." People said the photo was inspiring. She always found that funny. Inspiration was just a fancy word for reminding people to do what they should have been doing anyway. Evening settled in. Golden light stretched through the window, painting the empty test tubes in warm color. On the desk lay her open laptop, a draft titled Ethics in Biomedical Validation. The first line read, "Honesty is not a virtue. It is the survival mechanism of knowledge." Evelyn reread it, then added one last line, a reminder for herself. Freedom does not come from winning. It comes from no longer needing to fight. She saved the document and closed the laptop. When she stepped out of the institute, the sky had cleared. Seattle rarely offered a full sunset, but that day was an exception. Sunlight slid across the bay, turning the water a soft gold. On the sidewalk, she ran into Darren, a former Helix Vita colleague now working at a small startup. He lifted a hand. "Heard you are teaching again." "Not teaching," she said. "Just reminding people not to forget. And do they listen?" Not many, but enough. They laughed. the quiet kind shared by people who have survived collapse. Night fell. Her small apartment on Capitol Hill was still, broken only by the whistle of the kettle. Evelyn opened the window, letting the night wind drift through. On the table lay an unopened envelope stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Justice. She opened it. The letter was simple. The court has finalized restitution. You are entitled to compensation as a primary whistleblower. Evelyn read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. Money was not what she needed. This quiet was the real reward. She poured tea, took a slow sip, and looked out the window. Across the street, office windows still glowed, others still chasing what she had finally learned to release. On her desk, beside her mug, lay a student's note. Thank you for making me believe that telling the truth is still worth it. She placed a hand on the small paper and nodded. Outside, the Seattle night was no longer loud, only rain and wind, sounding like someone whispering to the world that freedom is not winning. Freedom is when you no longer need to win. Evelyn smiled, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply. A chapter closed, not with fireworks, but with a quiet, steady breath. A Seattle morning full of sunlight, rare, thin, warm enough to make people believe the worst days were behind them. Evelyn sat in a small cafe on Pine Street at an old table, her familiar cup of Earl Grey and a thick notebook, not to write code, but to rewrite the memories of someone who had learned how to be quiet. On the table, the morning paper carried a small line near the bottom corner. Helix Vita case closed. Former Chief Executive Officer and Chief Innovation Officer. Plead guilty. Community praises ethical reform. She skimmed it, folded it, and set it aside. No triumph, no sorrow. Just the feeling of an ordinary morning, and perhaps that was the most extraordinary part. At the next table, an older woman glanced over, pointing at the headline. You are that engineer, aren't you? The quiet one, Evelyn smiled. I am just someone who stopped at the right time. The woman chuckled over her coffee. This world needs more people who know when to stop. Evelyn stepped onto the street. Light wind, the smell of coffee mixed with the scent of wet ferns. On the billboard outside the old Helix Vita building hung the logo of a new medical startup. Beneath it, a bold slogan, Integrity is Innovation. She paused for a moment. Good, she whispered. They finally kept something worth keeping. That afternoon, she returned to the institute. The students were gone. The lab was silent, except for the soft breath of air through the vents. Evelyn sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and wrote a few lines, not for a board, not for the press, but for herself. Every revenge story begins with pain, but its ending does not have to be blood. Sometimes all it takes is one person who knows how to be silent at the right moment. One system stops running, and the truth eventually finds its own way to the surface. She saved the file and titled it, Peace Served Earned. When she left the institute, the Seattle sunset washed through the windows, bathing the ferns she had planted in soft light. The glow slanted across her face, calm, steady, untouched by anger. She thought about it. Resentment keeps people frozen. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it is moving forward. Her phone buzzed, a message from a podcast called Revenge with Reason. Evelyn, the audience wants to hear you tell it. The story of the quietest power move in corporate life. Will you join us? She typed back, I do not tell it to be heard. I tell it so someone else who is quiet knows they are not alone. When the city lights flickered on, she walked along the bay. Reflections shimmered, ripples laughing softly on the water. A young man stopped her. You are Evelyn Hart, right? I saw the clip about you. She fired me to impress the board. Evelyn laughed. They kept that title, yes. And, after hearing your story, I quit my old job. And then, now I work at an environmental tech lab. The pay is lower, but I sleep better. Evelyn nodded. Then you already won. He left. Evelyn watched him go, city lights catching the edges of her eyes. A strange kind of brightness, not loud, just clear. Back home, she brewed a pot of tea, opened her laptop and glanced at her unread emails. The last one had a simple subject line: "Thank you from someone you never met." She opened it. "I used to work at the Helix Vita branch in Texas. The day the system collapsed, I was terrified I would be blamed. But because of what you did, I was cleared. I kept the newspaper about the case, not because the company lost, but because I saw someone dare to be right." She read it, smiling softly, not from pride, but from knowing that sometimes the smallest action echoes just far enough to help someone find their own courage. Evelyn turned off the lights and opened the window. Night wind drifted through, carrying tea, rain, and a quiet peace. She sat down, looking out at the city, thinking of the people still awake from deadlines, from fear, from someone telling them they were too slow. She wished she could tell them, "It is all right. Going slow never killed anyone. Lies do." And if you are listening to this story, I have a question for you. Have you ever stayed silent in front of something wrong because you thought you were too small to change anything? Leave a comment. I want to hear your answer. And if Evelyn's story made you rethink the idea of justice, hit subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but because somewhere out there, someone still needs to hear that the truth deserves to survive. We tell these stories not for revenge, but to remember. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice humans have ever created. I am your storyteller. Keep a corner of peace for yourself, and a piece of courage too. See you in the next story.